record on this computer. All right, guys, I am here with an old friend of mine, old colleague of mine, Pete Helfrich. Now, Pete and I served on the College of Paramedics together. Pete's an old balls paramedic like me. We've been in the trenches a long time. We've served our profession together, and Pete has, one of the things I love about Pete is that he's done a great job for our profession. As president of the College of Paramedics, he sorted out the governance structure on the college. He got our ducks in a row, got our ship in order. I don't know if those are the right analogies, probably the wrong analogies, but he did a great job. And one of the things I really appreciated about Pete was his willingness to engage in difficult conversations. In fact, he really believed in constructive conflict. Let's say if we have a disagreement, let's talk about it in a civil way and hash things out and try to come to some kind of agreement or some agreement that allowed us to move forward. And so in that spirit, I invited Pete on my podcast because we seem to have a disagreement about vaccine mandates and different things like that. And, in Pete's great, I guess, in the plus column for Pete, I do this quite often. I get a lot of people on social media call me out for my opinion. And I often invite them on to my podcast to have a civil discussion with me to set me straight, because I don't want to be wrong about things. I've been wrong about a lot of things in my life, but most of them all just disappear. They don't take me up on it, and they stop, on the plus side, they stop harassing me, I guess. I'm not saying that Pete's been harassing me, but he's definitely expressed his disagreement on social media. And so I put out my standard, will you come on my podcast and let's have an adult discussion about this? And to Pete's great credit, he did. And I should have expected that because he's Pete and we served on the college, and he's not afraid of having difficult conversations where we disagree. So Pete, with all that being said, welcome to the Liberty Experts podcast. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. I appreciate that intro. That was great. And those were entertaining times on the college there. So it's good good learning.
Right. And you just give us a little bit of your background, Pete. Like I'm assuming you're still out there in the trenches on the front line.
Yeah. So still currently working with AHS as a paramedic in Calgary Metro. And this is my 31st or my 32nd year as registered in the province here. Just live in Calgary, a couple of kids and the family here, and we're all kind of, we've been really lucky. Nobody's been sick, and this last almost 2 years now, and the kids are thriving, and so that's a good thing. And we're just kind of trudging through like the rest of us, hoping that this thing will end eventually one day. And so you and I served on the college for, well, I think we were there almost exactly the same. I think I was 1 year ahead of you, and that's right. Yeah. So we were there for like the 5 or 6 years together, and that was good. Yeah. We always did have some entertaining discussions. So
we did. Yeah. I mean, one of the things about the college board was, there were people from all different walks of life, different political viewpoints, and we all seem to be able to work together. So in that spirit, let's talk about what we disagree. So I've made some posts online, and you seem to disagree with me. Where do you think our disagreement is?
Well, I think sometimes it's just I have no problem with. Obviously, I disagree with some of your opinions around the vaccine mandate and how to move forward. It's also just sometimes some of the rhetoric that I don't. I think the thing that I have, or the biggest problem I have with what's happening in society right now globally, is simply this inability. You have to entrench yourself on one side or the other. You're either pro or anti. And I think, and I get it, when you're trying to speak to a crowd, when you're trying to, get people to, let's do something about this, either if you're on the right or the left, it doesn't matter, then, you have to use rhetoric to fire people up. And I just don't think that that's useful, though. A friend at work, as an example of how people just seem to entrench themselves on one side or the other. A friend at work brought in a patient who had just had the vaccine 24 hours prior. and the guy was having I think it was a stroke, and I think the person actually died. And so the paramedic says to the emerge doc, you know, he just got his vaccine 24 hours before. And the emerge doc just got very upset about this. Well, that has nothing to do with this. How can you say that? Don't even bring that up again. And I think that kind of, that just doesn't help either. You know,
right.
It's very possible that the vaccine could have caused this.
Right.
Why would we say otherwise? And so I just think that, you know, that is not helping us as a society move forward with this as we continue to deal with this problem.
Yeah, that's fair. And, you know, I've received my fair share of the criticism with, I guess, the tone or the language I use, especially in my speeches when I'm trying to fire up a crowd and trying to attract support for a particular cause. Those are fair things. And look, I completely agree with you here. This is a very polarizing issue. I'm glad you said that. It's like they force you into one of two camps. You're either like a pro science, which means you're also very pro draconian lockdowns, or you're anti-vax and also a super nutter, right? Yeah. And those are the two camps that it seems like, you know, binary thinkers want to push you into one of those two camps. Now, you know, I'm a perfect example of, I don't fit into either of those camps because I'm pretty pro vaccine. Like, I was one of the first adopters. I was pissed that I couldn't get it earlier. I want it to be, you know, in the experimental treatment. I got a high risk tolerance. I believed in the science and behind the vaccine, and I wanted to be one of the first ones to get it, and I couldn't. So I was pissed on the other side of things. But I'm also very anti restrictions on civil liberties and different things like that. I'm concerned about how far the government's going with this. And so which camp do I fall into? And, you know what I mean? Now, I guess in my defense here with regards to the rhetoric I'm using, you know, I've got a number of colleagues who face dismissal, face loss of their livelihood after decades of faithful service to their community and highly valuable service to their community. I mean, a lot of these guys are who we look up to when we want to model how we want to be in terms of service to the public, and their jobs are being threatened. Their livelihoods, and in some cases, you know, there's been talk among some in the group about how they'd be better off not in this world. At least their family would be looked after that way. You know, I assume they're talking about life insurance and different things like that. So in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm not just fighting for my colleagues' livelihoods, I'm fighting for their lives. And in this particular case, you know, there is a pandemic going on. You and I would agree on that for sure. You know, there are precautions that need to be taken. There are things that need to be done that aren't within the norm of, you know, when we're not in a pandemic. And so, you know, the argument, I guess, being made is that vaccine is one of those things. If you don't get vaxxed, you can't be part of this. But I think in this case, we have alternatives. You know, we've been working for a year and a half with different safety measures in place that seem to have been fairly effective. I mean, we have pre-screening, we have meticulous PPE wearing and donning and doffing. I haven't heard of any cases of healthcare workers spreading it to patients or to colleagues. It may be the case that that's happened. And in addition to that, we also have testing now that's fairly readily available. And so these guys are willing to get tested regularly on top of the already fairly effective safety measures that have been in place for a year and a half. And so, you know, to me here, in these particular cases, it seems like there ought to be the option to test. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I got a few, you know, I guess, you know, and I guess it's just all how you approach things, right? You refer to, you know, things as a draconian lockdown. And you know, if that's how people feel, then I think, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to have this conversation. Sorry, I'm gonna digress here a little bit. You know, it's my brother and I right now aren't talking, because of what's going on here. And that bothers me a lot.
Yeah.
And it all came out, it was about 4 months ago when we were coming into the fourth wave and it was getting really gnarly. And that was also the time when people were really getting feeling strong about not getting vaccinated, and peers and people who I work with. And so there was like it was really spicy at work for a while there. And then I got and my brother, not involved in healthcare at all, not really understanding what I'm experiencing, is kind of sniping me with comments, and
Mm-hmm.
it just got to a point where I was just like, I can't, and we probably didn't have the best conversation about it, but since then we've stopped talking. And so I think, one of the reasons that I wanted to engage with you, and I try and engage with people at work, and I know I surprised some people at work. Scott Crawford, he was the fellow who ended up on the Western Standard magazine there. Scott's very much opposed to the vaccine, and I think I surprised him when I saw him in the hallway, and I'm like, Scott, come on, sit down, let's chat. I really want to try and understand why it is that people view it as a draconian lockdown. Does it really feel like something out of 1984? And if so, how? And that's what I think I'm trying to understand a little bit here. And I just want to, and again, to segue a little bit onto people who are, potentially facing losing their jobs, which I think was yesterday with AHS. I think you had to declare by yesterday. Right. I guess I really just need to try and understand, because I don't think it's the science. People don't seem to really be interested in the research and the science. So I feel like it's got to be something more spiritual or emotional or there's something else there that's saying to them, no, I'm actually willing to lose my job over getting a vaccine. And all of us, and you included, I'm sure, we all had to get vaccinated to go be paramedic students. Mm-hmm. You had to get vaccinated to get a job with AHS. If you wanted to go travel anywhere, I still have my yellow passport for my yellow fever. You had to get vaccinated. So I guess that's where I'm really struggling with some of this. And I'm really just trying to understand a little bit more.
Yeah, well, look, I think this is highly unusual, at least in our lifetime, for one thing, right? Everywhere we go, we're got masked people. We've got, we've got businesses being shut down. We've got livelihoods being ruined. So certainly those people are feeling the pinch of this. We got to show. Now we have to show our QR codes everywhere we go. If we want to participate in society, there's two classes of citizen. There's those that have the QR codes who have been compliant, and then there's those who haven't. That feels a little bit apartheid-ish, you have to admit. Certainly it's a choice that people are making rather than an immutable characteristic or something like that. So I'll admit there's some differences, but I think that's where a lot of this is coming from. Our travel is restricted. We can't board a plane. We can't, this is being ratcheted up constantly. And it started with two weeks to flatten the curve, which a lot of people shrugged and said, okay, well, if that's what's needed to, and now, we're into 18 months of this, and people who question it, just like you feel uncomfortable, and rightfully so, when people snipe at you and use kind of hyperbolic and dismissive rhetoric to refer to you, probably, and social media, I think, is probably not a good place to talk about this for some of those reasons.
No.
These people have been feeling it for 18 months. They question whether these lockdowns are necessary, whether these restrictions are necessary, and they get branded as conspiracy theorists or anti-science deniers, or all these things. So I think for the past 18 months, a lot of these people have been feeling just like you feel when people snipe at you. They've been feeling that and it's been all over the establishment media. The unvaccinated are the reason we don't have our freedoms. The unvaccinated are the reason why there's a healthcare crisis. The unvaccinated are being blamed for all the ills in society, and that does not help them that does not help in terms of building bridges between these people and making them feel like, yeah, they're still a valuable member of the society, and they're still, they're not being oppressed, right? So I think all these things play into it. Now, some of these people, everyone has a different reason. Everyone in this group of people that I'm representing, for example, have various reasons for not wanting to get vaccinated. Some of them are reasons where if I were in their shoes, I'd probably be making the same decision. Others, I definitely wouldn't be making the same decision as them. Some of them have medical concerns. So for example, Brian has, got hypoxic rhabdomyolysis, serving his community. He's been recovering for a year and a half. He was looking forward to getting the vaccine, but pushed pause on it because, he's suffering from neurological symptoms. He's chronically wiped out. He's just worried that getting the vaccine is going to wipe him out even more. It doesn't, so he's taking precautions. He's staying isolated. He's on modified work. He's not on touching any patients. And he's willing to get tested. And, so Brian, if I were in his situation, I'd probably do the same thing. We had another guy who had myocarditis. He's like, I don't want to get vaccinated right now till I'm fully recovered from this. Seems reasonable. Another guy has a rare genetic disorder, and there's the people, like a 1 in a million thing. And the people in his support group who also have this disorder, like a third of them have gone blind or something from the vaccine. Now, there's been no research around how the vaccine affects this particular genetic disorder. There's just these anecdotes, but there's enough anecdotes to raise concern and be like, can I hold off until there's more research in about how this is going to affect me personally? Now, there are other people who are very religious. I'm not religious. But I come from an evangelical Christian background, so I have a little bit of insight into their mind. And I remember growing up and hearing about end times and how there would be like this one world governance structure. And in order to participate in the economy, you would have to take this indelible mark that is irreversible. And in order to participate in the economy, and that would kind of show your allegiance and compliance with this evil regime, and basically get you kicked out of heaven and not one of the elect. Now, I could see how those people would look at this. You've got a global, it seems like the nations around the world are operating in lockstep. And, they're being banned from participating in the economy. They can't have jobs. They can't go into a lot of places. They can't travel. I could understand how that might prick their religious sensitivities about this. And, when your immortal soul is on the line, I could understand why they'd be willing to lose their job and suffer to not lose who they are as a person and who they are as a soul or something like that. Yeah. So those are some of the reasons. And ultimately, while I don't understand some of the reasons why people aren't getting vaccines, what I really don't understand is the rationale behind some of these lockdowns and some of these mandates, right? That doesn't take into account the individual. It doesn't take into account all the other options available. Most municipal employers are allowing testing as an option to vaccination, and a lot of other big employers are as well. So I guess I'm trying to wrap my head, just like you're trying to wrap your head around why people wouldn't want to get the vaccine. And I am too, like before a lot of these things, a lot of the work I was doing was actually going into groups and gently challenging people on their anti-vax stance and saying, look, why don't you apply the same line of thinking that you have to the vaccine, which are all legitimate grievances. Spike proteins are a concern, inflammation, blood clots, all these things are legitimate concerns. All these adverse reactions are legitimate concerns. Guess what? They're also, all those same things you listed are also concerns with COVID. And so why not apply the same line of thinking to COVID? And so, I was actually getting somewhere with that work until these people had their livelihoods threatened and, their participation in society threatened. And now they're in a state of fear, panic, where there's no way you're going to be able to get through to these people rationally, and understandably so. Their fight or flight response has kicked in, and they're simply not going to move on this until these measures are lifted and they're looked at as autonomous individuals again and adults again. And then they'll probably start thinking about it a little bit more closely. So, to me, it's like, just like you're wondering why these people aren't budging, I'm wondering why government and these health authorities aren't budging on this, and where they think they, as a libertarian, obviously, where do they think they get the right? What makes them a special human that can impose this? I can't do this to my neighbor. I can't do this to other people. If I win a popularity contest, do I suddenly get the right to do that? So those are some of the questions that come up for me on that side of it.
Yeah, sorry,
there's a lot there.
No, it's good, man. Listen, about social media, Mark Zuckerberg created Facebook because even if you look at the guy now, he'd have a hard time picking up a cockroach, and so the reason that he created Facebook was so that he could get dates. And I think for me, that's the sum value of Facebook. There is no other value in Facebook. Now, my wife would disagree with me because she says that, with the kids' clothing and stuff like that, there's this great group on there. It's like, they swap clothes. It's awesome. Okay, sure.
Are you telling me that you won't upload your consciousness to the metaverse? Is that what I'm hearing?
Like, I didn't want to go there. What somebody told me, what is meta in Hebrew? I wish I could remember what it was. It's something really terrible, or like, yeah, it's really silly. Like, they didn't think when you chose the word meta. If you go through the different language, like I know in Hebrew and Greek, it just doesn't make sense. They didn't think about when they decided to pick that. So Facebook, I think, and Twitter as well too, right? You only get whatever it is, 280 characters now. You can't have this kind of conversation about people's emotions, about their belief in a God, about leadership. You can't have this conversation in 280 characters. I don't care how long you take to tweet with somebody, you can't have a legitimate, mature, nuanced conversation. And so I think, other than giving you the odd snipe with a comment that you made, I don't see the value. This is the value. You and I sitting down, trying to have these conversations, sitting with friends in a hallway, that's where we're going to solve this problem, and not. And you talk about the mainstream media, and like, you got no argument from me, man. Like, CNN, Fox, they are both, they both need to be bombed. There is no value in either one of those organizations. I don't see any point. And in fact, in a lot of the media right now, I think it's really shocking how they both, again, they just played it, and they're just trying to make money. I get it. It doesn't help society one bit, either one of them. I think it's really shocking. And I think the other thing that's made this whole thing worse is just the fact that, you talked about it being a popularity contest, and it's true. I mean, that's all elections are now. People want government to tell them what they want to hear. That's it. And that's not good governance, as you and I both know. That's not good governance. And so, you've got just a complete failure of leadership right from the beginning, from Trudeau, from Kenny, from our municipal government leaders. Like, it's so sad, because if you had some real leaders in there, some people who understood governance, I think we wouldn't be here. And that's a big, kind of like statement, but I truly believe that. I think if we had some legitimate leadership, I don't think we would be where we're at. And then just that, you talked about the exceptions to why they're not getting vaccinated. 100% agree. I don't have any argument there. I think it's a shame that people who have legitimate medical concerns are being forced to get the vaccine. I don't agree. They're such a small group of people. Like, there's, we're talking a small group of people. How is it that we can't look at that and say, like your one friend, the firefighter there, how can they not look at that and say, yeah, that's cool. We'll wait until you feel like I don't understand that. And then I guess the problem with, I'm also not, I was not blessed with an ability to have faith in God. So
someone's got to fill up hell, Pete. I guess
yeah.
It's going to be you and me.
So, I guess I would just say, the eyes see what the heart wants, and so when they are looking at, their bit of scripture, they're going to find what they want to find to support. Cognitive dissonance, I think, plays a big part in some of, and maybe even on both sides, and bias and filters.
For sure.
People wake up every morning and they're like, the COVID vaccine is going to save the world. The COVID vaccine is going to kill the world. And you go through the rest of your day trying to justify why you believe that.
Right.
And you find whatever it is you can find to support your narrative.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Do you think there's going to be a point where you say, okay, enough's enough, like, is it 5th or 6th booster? Is it after you get COVID and recover? What do you think? Is there a point where you would disagree with, say, the health authorities over their latest mandate or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, we're both old enough, I think, now to know that, you really can never say never. Like I would,
Right.
When I talk to a lot of folks who are opposed to this, the vaccine or the mandate, a lot of it for some of them comes down to, it's about choice. They all say, well, this should be my choice.
Yeah.
And I just really struggle with that, I think, a little bit, because I always kind of question back. I'm like, well, what is choice really? Like,
right.
We could, we could take the red pill or the blue pill and, go down the rabbit hole and talk about, what's choice really.
Sure.
Because I think choice is a luxury. It's a privilege to have choice, because people are choosing to not get vaccinated because they know that there's a healthcare system that if they get sick, there's a healthcare system that's going to support them. And so they're people who live in countries where there is no healthcare system that has that capacity, they don't have the choice. And so getting vaccinated is, they just do it because they don't want to get sick. So I don't know. I don't think I answered your question there.
Yeah. I guess I was just wondering if you had a line in the sand and what it would be, right? Like, I'll give you an example for myself. I'm thinking, with my thoughts about the booster shot. Okay, like I'm 9 months post, maybe not even 10 months post vaccination, and I know for sure my immunity is likely waning. I from what I've seen on the data in Israel and different places, it seems like after about 6 months, the efficacy starts to wane on the vaccine, and it doesn't do a good job at as good a job at protecting you from sickness. It seems like from the data I've seen, the vaccine isn't all that great at all 1 to 3 months after vaccination at stopping community spread. So it seems to me like the vaccine's fairly effective at stopping me from getting sick and hospitalized for at least 6 months. But it starts to wane after that. But it's not all that great maybe at stopping community spread. I mean, in Iceland right now, for example, they have a 90% vaccination rate, and their case rate right now is higher than it's ever been. But their deaths and sickness are very low as well. So it's effective at stopping that. So it seems like good as an individual protection, not so great at stopping spread, which is, again, one of the reasons why I think it's unreasonable to expect people to use vaccination as like a workplace safety measure or something like that. It doesn't seem to be as safe, for example, as getting tested. But where was I going with this? So my thinking with the vaccine is okay. I'm thinking about getting an antibody test to see, as approximate way of looking to see how immune I am. Maybe I've been exposed to COVID and I've got high antibodies and different things like that. My antibody levels are high. I probably won't get the booster. If they're low, I probably will. And eventually, when I get COVID, like I expect we all will eventually, I want to reserve the right to not get boosters ad infinitum for the rest of my life to maintain my career. So to me, that's kind of a line in the sand where, well, honestly, I'd probably take a cyanide pill that gave me a 5% chance of death to keep my job. So, I'm willing 5%? To, yeah. What? Wow. I don't know. No, I mean, look, I'm just saying I would take, if the risk of death was only 5%, I'd take it. I think the line in the sand would be like a 10% risk of death. I probably wouldn't take that. Yeah. But my point is I would do a lot to keep my job. I need my job. Without my job, my chances of living get substantially lower. So yeah. I'm willing to do, I guess, tolerate a lot of coercion, even dangerous coercion, to keep my job. But I would not be happy if there was a mandate saying that I have to get a shot that I really don't want, because I've gotten and recovered from COVID, because I've got high provable immunity, all those things. And by the way, that describes a lot of the people in our group. They've gotten and recovered from COVID. They have high provable immunity, and they're just saying, why are you making me take this? Like, what's the point? There, even as low as the risk is with the shot, there are still some risks. And, we can't trust the other thing that bugs me a little bit is the way they look at data from COVID and from the vaccine. So with COVID, and it's understandable why they do it. I understand the public health authorities' point of view, but when you're trying to aggregate data and get a sense of how dangerous the virus is, if COVID is mentioned on a death certificate, even as a contributing factor or whatever, someone's positive, we know in Ontario, for example, people that died from car accidents were counted as COVID deaths in some cases. Now, I understand why that is. It's like you're trying to find a rough picture of how bad this pandemic is. And so, rather than sifting through each individual death certificate and spending man hours trying to get an accurate number and figure out cause of death, you're just going to pick every death certificate that has COVID listed on it as that was the cause of death. Right. But now on the flip side with the vaccine, like the case you mentioned where someone 24 hours after getting vaccinated, that's not going to be counted as a vaccine death. Now, if it were counted like they count COVID deaths, let's say the first week or whenever you would expect the most adverse reactions to happen, you would say, okay, any medical condition that happens, within a week, if a person dies, we're counting that death as a vaccine death. So it's difficult to make an apples to apples comparison here. We just, so I can understand some of the anti-vax points about how we don't really know very accurately the data from vaccine injuries and different things like that. Trying to remember where I was going with this, but yeah, I guess my point is that, at a certain point, I want to reserve the right not to get the vaccine. And I'm wondering if there's a point like that for you.
And that's a good, I don't know. I hadn't, sometimes I think of, and I've done a little bit of reading, not a lot. It's been very surface, no recognized, kind of literature from any kind of, approved authors on smallpox. Because when I started to explore this idea of choice a little bit, especially around, pandemics, I kind of went back and I thought about those first folks back, apparently it was in China in around like the 13 or the 1400s, who saw the connection between those pustules on the, on the cow, on the udder of the cow, and smallpox. And somehow they recognized, I don't know what it was that they did, but somehow somebody made a connection. They're like, maybe it's after I've milked the cow. It's funny how everybody who milks the cow, they don't get smallpox. Why is that? Right. So somebody made a connection somewhere. Mm-hmm. But then when they made that connection, they're like, well, how do we use this? And so what they used to do in China was that they would take a scab of the pustule, off of the cow's udder, and they would blow it up your nose. And so then you'd get sick, and then you'd be immune from smallpox.
Right.
And I just think about those early first people, and I'm like, man, if they didn't have the courage to be like, let me get this straight, you're going to blow a scab off of a cow's udder up my nose, and that's going to help me not get smallpox. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know.
But
you know,
these people were, it strikes me that they're making decisions about their own personal health, right? They're looking at, they're making a risk assessment. They're looking at how dangerous smallpox is.
right.
And they're like, how the hell can I stop from dying from this thing?
But
right?
it was still, but there still had to be a community focus back there though, Tim, because, you know, community was, I mean, that was everything. You had to support and have a strong community. If you didn't, then some Mongolian horde would come down and, you know, and decimate you. You had to be a strong community. And so maybe.
But wait a sec. Do you think that their motivation for taking that was community or self-preservation?
Why couldn't it be both?
Well, I agree. I think that self-preservation serves the community when it comes to
pandemics, yeah, I mean,
right?
Well, no, but that's exactly it. I mean, in order for me to continue working, in order for me to continue to guard against the Mongolian horde coming, I have to be healthy and strong. You're telling me if I do this, I'm going to remain healthy and strong, which is going to support the community. So go ahead, blow it up my nose. You know, so I don't. And you know, I'm trying to answer your question, and I'm not doing a great job, and it's because I think I just don't know. Because I try and think about that big history thing about this, you know, this idea of community and what is in the best interest of community, what is in the best interest of society, and does my need for choice and being right, does that outweigh the needs for the community or the needs for society?
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean. Let's go back with this smallpox thing a little bit, because I remember before they started using cowpox to inoculate against smallpox, they actually used smallpox to inoculate against smallpox.
Right.
Now that was a dangerous inoculation, and a good portion of the people that inoculated themselves with smallpox died because, you know, so I think that the theory was that they'd get a small enough viral load, so they'd prick a smallpox person's pustule, and then they'd prick someone they wanted to inoculate with the same needle, basically to introduce a small amount of smallpox and hopefully just get a localized little infection that your body could easily fight off and then build up immunity. Obviously, a lot of people died, but I think, you know, I'm guessing that the primary driving factor behind that was the individual making a risk calculation about themselves. Like, do I want to risk smallpox or this vaccine? And they looked at the inoculation as a lower risk than smallpox, and they rolled the dice on it. You know, I think again, maybe some people said, you know what, I'm going to get this for the good of the community. Maybe that was their thinking. I don't know, but I think where I get a little bit concerned is, let's use that smallpox example, when the government says, okay, the whole community is going to have to get this or be ostracized from the community, and we're willing to accept a 20% death rate here for this inoculation for the good of the community. I'm not sure that that is necessarily helpful for the community, and B, it certainly isn't helpful for the individual. And so when I go back, when I think about this individual collective thing, you know, I think one of the paradoxes of Western civilization that has created all this flourishing, all this wealth, all this health, has been the recognition that the sacrosanct unit of society, of community, is the individual, and that respecting individual rights paradoxically is collectively a good thing. I mean, it actually creates more wealth. I mean, this is why, you know, as Steven Pinker has pointed out, over 1 billion people in the last decade have been lifted out of poverty worldwide. It's been the respect for the individual rather than this kind of top-down collective control, I guess. It's rule in the name of the collective, right? So I think that's the fundamental insight of Western civilization. So that's where I get a little bit leery about, I certainly respect people who make decisions and sacrifice themselves, let's say, to some degree for the community. I mean, I'm in the line of work where I've taken on that as a duty. I will run into a burning building and I will risk my life and health to protect my community. There's something noble about that. I like that. I don't expect everyone to do that. But if I would have a problem if the government came along and said, Tim, you must run into buildings. That is your job. If you don't, we're going to remove from you your ability to be a part of this community and and make a livelihood and everything else. Right. So that to me is the difference. It's force and coercion versus people being free to make the choice. And here's where I think we would have some agreement. I don't have the right to walk around with COVID-19 in public. I don't have the right to go into work being contagious. I don't have the right to infect other people with the virus. And I have no problem with other people using coercion to keep me out of the public, to keep me out of grocery stores, movie theaters, workplaces, whatever, to prevent me from spreading the contagion. All I ask is that they have some evidence behind that. I mean, usually before we remove someone's freedom, we have some reasonable cause, right? Symptoms, a test, something that leads us to believe that there's contagion. And I don't think simply being unvaccinated rises to that. Most unvaccinated people aren't contagious with COVID-19. And also a vaccination status doesn't mean that I can walk around with COVID-19 in public either, right? So vaccination status to me is irrelevant. What matters is, are you contagious with COVID-19? And in that case, certainly we can remove your choice. Certainly you don't have the choice to infect other people. That is crossing the line. So,
but again, I go back to that whole sense of community, though. I mean, I think part of the reason, and you kind of mentioned early on, you just said that, some of this work that the social distancing, the hand washing, the mask wearing, and the lockdowns have worked in help. I mean, and that's the problem, though, is that if we didn't have to do a lockdown, like if we did a lockdown and it the disease kept running rampant, okay, we should not do lockdowns. It's not working. Right. But we've shown that if we do a lockdown, the disease, like the hospitals stop filling.
Well,
so
I don't know. I don't know about that, Pete. I mean, I've looked at, if you look at the charts and compare places, neighboring counties, neighboring jurisdictions, and some have done lockdowns and some have let things buck. There doesn't seem to be that much difference in outcomes. It seems like this virus doesn't care one whit about public health implementation. It seems to run rampant when it wants to run rampant, regardless of lockdown or no lockdown. So I'm not 100% sure of that. And the other thing I would say to that is, public health authorities, and I put myself in their shoes, their primary concern is stopping the spread of COVID. And so all of their implementation, all of their recommendations has to do with stopping the spread. But, there's more to life than just viral avoidance. And so what will be interesting for me to see, and I suspect it'll take years, to figure this out, is what is the excess mortality and death rate of public health measures that infringe on individual liberty? We don't know the answer to that yet, but I suspect we will in the future. Or there'll be a way of answering that. Sweden might be the control. Like, let's look at the excess mortality there during the pandemic versus other places, or I don't know. You could probably find some controls and then see, but I don't think it's that there is no price to pay in terms of health and mortality when you start implementing public health measures. You might be, even if they're good at stopping the spread of the virus, things like opioid addiction from emergencies of isolation, people forgetting how to operate. I don't know about you, but I'm noticing a huge surge in call volume that has nothing to do with COVID. And it would be interesting someday to see if scholarship relates this to people having been isolated and locked down over the last year and a half, or having restrictions put on them, at least, and how that contributes to it. How does masking kids contribute to their health and longevity? All these things are unknown, but yet we are applying them as if the only thing that matters in life is stopping the spread of the virus.
Well, could you imagine being a sociology or an anthropology student right now? Like, you could sit back and be like, I could write 500 PhD worthy articles now on how society is coping with this. And I mean, good Lord, it's like shooting fish in a barrel when if you're a sociology or an anthropology student to go through and try to understand how society, what happened during this time. And I agree with you. I think, they're going to work. There's so many people who are just not coping at all. And it's really sad, but I mean, it goes back to this sense of community and this idea of community. And I think that's where society has got a real problem right now. And I thought that before COVID. Right. There's too much Facebook. There's too much universe, and not enough this kind of thing happening. And so I think that's where people are getting lonely. They don't have connection. They don't have human connection anymore. There's not, that strong sense of community. And I think it'd be really curious, again, as a sociology student, to go out and to find people who, struggled with their mental health, and to see what was their community support like. Did they have a lot of friends? Did they have, could they go to work? Like, are you and I coping better with this because you and I get to go to work every day, or when we go to work, and so we have community there, good or bad. It's still, we're going in and we're hanging out with people. The guy who has to stay at home in his office and his condo, I mean, that's gotta be tough. So what is that? Where is that community for that person, or that support?
Right. The small business owner.
And
that, I mean, that's a good point too, right? I mean, these people whose livelihoods are being threatened aren't being viewed as part of the community, right? They're being ostracized from the community, and that's not likely to endear them to the community and help them think more community minded. Like, if our goal is to get people to be more community minded and more willing to make sacrifices for their community, it seems like this is the exact wrong way to go about it. If anything, you're entrenching them as being adversaries to the community, and they're going to embody that.
I agree. And I go back to leadership, right? And sometimes too, I think I go back to the voter. Like, people continually voted for the same governments year after year, election after election. And, so what you saw was an erosion of this idea of the public health department. The very people who could have been more prepared, been more capable of responding to this. I mean, they've been undermined, for probably generations. Since the last pandemic, that was really viewed as being a problem. As soon as that waned, they were like, "Wow, we don't need to give money to public health anymore. Really, what's the big deal?" So I think that that's made this worse as well. You've got leaders who are just interested in being popular and in supporting and in making sure their base feel connected to their base, and then you've got maybe a public health system or a public health department it's a skeleton. Like, you got some researchers in there who sit in a basement doing their best to try and keep the public health system going, and then all of a sudden you've got to make some real legitimate, like, Churchillian kind of decisions on how society is going to move forward, and you're getting it from a department that's doing its best. And I think that, and there's more nuance to that, but I think that in part has led us to where we're at, because now you don't have the capacity for nuance. You don't have the capacity to look at all the different things and say, okay, we can handle this. You basically have to do this and say, okay, well, you people over there, and what's going to be best to make the economy work here? And we think it's going to be supporting the vaccinated. But quickly, Tim, I just wanted to say that bit about, how the lockdowns may or may not have worked. And I think there's just, I remember reading Neil Turok. He's a physicist in Canada here, and he talked about how scientists and the research committee or community have failed society. And they failed society because they've made research and science so technical that the average Joe can't really just sit down and be like, oh, I get that. Like, it's like when you look at some of those, quantum physics equations, like you are literally, I could be looking at Chinese and I wouldn't know the difference. And so I'm so disconnected from this idea that I really have to trust that these researchers are doing the right thing, and I have to trust what they're doing. Yeah. And then there's this whole idea of really understanding research. Research is so nuanced. It is so detailed on, if you're going to put out a decent research paper, there is a reason it goes through a group of your mentors to make sure that it's good research, because they all know what to look for and see where you're going to make your mistakes before you put it out there. And that's why peer review is so much more important. And you can't take a specific example and apply it to a general. That's not how research works. Research takes a general concept and makes it and narrows it down to a specific. And it's that weight of balance. So, the where does the research lie? Like, research isn't always going to say that the vaccine is 100%. It's not going to say that, because it's not. It may be like 70-30 or 80-20, I would hope. So
yeah, but Pete, don't you think this really isn't about science per se? I mean, this is really about values. And what I see here are two competing value systems. Like two people can look at the same scientific fact. Let's say the case fatality rate of COVID-19 is 5%. And on one side, you'll say, well, this justifies, lockdowns, or like, maybe the like science shows that the most effective way of stopping the spread of COVID is sealing everyone in hermetically sealed matrix pods and just feeding them a steady stream of government controlled propaganda or something like that. And some people say, well, if that's what we got to do to stop the spread, that's what we got to do. That's what science said. But other people might value liberty more than they value stopping the spread of COVID or something like that. And those people would look at that 5% and say, well, that in no way justifies any infringement on liberty or something like that. And so to me, what's happening here is it's really a debate of values, and it's being framed as a scientific debate. We can agree on scientific facts. And I think you and I may well agree on the scientific facts, but we might have where our disagreement might lie is on the values and how we then apply those scientific facts. So, for example, let me just say this: if at the start of COVID, I'm looking at images coming from China, people, bodies lying in the street, all this stuff, going like, holy crap, this might be super serious, and I might have to consider whether I stay employed as a paramedic. Do I want to be on the front line of this serious thing, right?
Yeah.
I have to make a risk assessment here of, and the risks I'm weighing are my risk of unemployment and my risk of getting seriously sick or dead from COVID, right? And so that's a choice that only I can make. Like, there's no scientific answer or scientific number. Like, I can look at the facts and say, okay, this is the risk of COVID to me and my age group and stuff like that, and this is my risk of unemployment, and make that decision for myself given my individual context. But I certainly can't make that decision for you, and whether it's right for you or someone else down the road. I mean, these facts are good for me to inform myself and make a risk assessment, but they're not necessarily good to impose a one-size-fits-all solution on society or something like that. And this is where the values debate comes in, I think.
No, and I think you're right. And that's why I try to bring in that whole science community and that disconnection, because I think people are so disconnected from it that because what's happening is that research is driving the decision-making. At least that's what it should be. Right. It isn't. We know that, but that's what it should be. But I think there's such a disconnect that people have a hard time, And again, it's because the research isn't always going to be 100%. There's always going to be a peer-reviewed, very, well-done research article that's going to come out that's going to say that the vaccine might not be as good as we wanted it to believe. That's going to happen.
Right. Well, I'll go even further, and I'll say that
there should be more documents that come out that say the vaccine is good, and that's that whole balance thing that happens. And just quickly, if we are going to live in a hermetically sealed where I'm fed government propaganda, that's where I draw the line, Tim.
All right, we found it, folks.
I would fight back then.
All right, sounds good. Well, let me say this. Here's where I think some of the disconnect with the science is coming in. You know, and I see this a little bit on both sides, right? So when the pandemic started, the media would put out things. Yeah. It would put out all sorts of anecdotes about kids getting Kawasaki disease and like, we got to do this for the kids, right? And people looking at this skeptically said, well, look, anecdotes don't make science, right? Let's see some data. Now I see the same thing happening on the other side, where we're seeing all these anecdotes of people dying from supposedly the vaccine, right? And you know, confirmation bias on both sides here, right? You're going to look for, if you're really concerned about COVID, you're going to look for all those things that confirm that bias. And pretty soon COVID is going to be the most dangerous thing ever. And we got to like impose on me, daddy, like whatever it takes, save me from this thing. And on the flip side, this vaccine is the most dangerous thing ever. And how dare you even ask me to do this kind of thing. And the disconnect here is, so the disconnect from my perspective is the highly polarized politicization of COVID and the pandemic and all these things, right? And like thinking binarily, like putting people, are you in this camp or this camp? Those are the two camps. You're either an anti-vax nutter or a draconian lockdown measure supporting blah, 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 right? And so now you could produce all the high quality science you want and mounds of it. You're going to have a hard time reaching people who have been ostracized and who have been demonized and who have been under this thing and forced into their own little bubble of confirmation bias. And I think it's like that to some degree on both sides of the thing. So that's the challenge I think that we have to address. And Pete, I think that you and I have started to address that challenge by having a constructive dialogue here today. So unless there's anything else, I think that might be a good place to end it.
I would, you know, and I'll just end on it just saying I agree with you. I mean, I think we both agree about the media. I think the media is just, you know, and you summed it up nicely. So I really appreciate the opportunity here, Tim, and we just need to have more of this with more people. And I think it's incumbent upon those of us like you and I to reach out to those who are maybe feeling ostracized and try and just listen and just try and understand and, you know, hope that we can, just support them and find a way out of this mess.
Yeah, agreed. This can't end soon enough. I will agree with you on that. So awesome. Thanks, Pete. Appreciate you coming on the Liberty Experts today.
Thanks, Tim.